I mean, there's several, but really we're going to want to talk through the blatant good versus evil that Harry is fearful of with Voldemort coming back now that he's in the open. He's also fearful because very few believe him. But under all of that, we have this fascist government of the Ministry of Magic who's trying to do everything they can to make this better, yet still in denial of what's coming. And then the epitome of that is this woman taking charge inside of a school where she has no business to be, right? So that's Umbridge. And this is Mark. These are people.
The guy I put on the servants.
Okay. This is the Mark.
This is the Mark. All right. Reach to the camera. Cameron just came on too. So,
Oh, and Mitch.
Am I in there? I'm the feral, yeah.
Hi, Arwen.
hi, that's this child. Yeah.
Oh, she's waving. Family is waving on the camera. This camera's and so. And Lois is there and then Midge and hey. Hi. That's cute. So Mark just drove over from Tampa.
This is where Harry and Baltimore can read each other's minds.
Yes, the beginnings of that. And Harry is panicked, right? So let's just start there. Yeah. Well, we get a glimpse of it in the book before, in the movie before, because we see that Harry has that vision of the Muggle getting killed inside of Tom Riddle's house at the very beginning. And so Harry gets that little bit first then. And we don't really know why he got to see that vision. And in the end, he finds out it's true. So now this is his second dose into seeing into Voldemort's mind, or even just being able to have an out-of-body experience. Did he have this type of experience in book 2 though, in movie 2? So when he has the vision that scares him the most, that's when Mr. Weasley gets attacked by the snake, right?
Right.
And so how does Harry panic about that? What is he thinking about his own life with that? Like, what do you think?
He said that he wasn't observing. He was a snake.
And that freaked him out.
No, it freaked me out too.
Yeah. So prior to that, he'd seen things happening. He'd seen the Department of Mysteries, even though he couldn't name it. He had seen the snake attack the Muggle man and get killed back in the 4th one. But this time he's feeling like he is the snake. And so do you see any connections there with number 2? In the chamber.
Your favorite one. She had competition yesterday.
Oh, how'd it go?
Good. Competition was over.
Yeah. No, that's okay. So what I was trying to get at was I was thinking that in the second one, Harry isn't really sure if he's the heir of Slytherin or not, because he can talk to snakes. He is being accused of it by his peers, and he's feeling that there's some sort of connection to him and Voldemort at that point because of the journal, because he goes down into the chamber, because he's sensing that there's a lot of similarities between he and Voldemort. And he brings out those fears to Dumbledore, and he says, like, why is it that I can talk to snakes? Why is it that there's these similarities between me and Voldemort? And from each book or movie on, we get to see Dumbledore giving Harry just a little bit more information, a little bit more, aside from, well, no, really all of them. There's a final scene where Harry and Dumbledore are talking, hello, where they're talking and they're saying things that help Harry understand a little bit more about what's unveiling. And last week we were talking about how is it like, does Dumbledore really know everything, or is he a really good guesser? And that's still up in the air, right? We're still seeing that he's not really sure of everything, but yet he has really good instinct with some stuff, but then maybe he's reckless in other ways. So we do know that Dumbledore is flawed. Yeah. But that was what I saw as a connection with Dumbledore. With Harry and the snake, and sensing that, bringing that back from number 2. We get Dementors again. What happened with them?
Because right at the beginning, they got friendly, right?
Yeah.
Right, and got Harry expelled, essentially, right?
Yeah.
And I think in court, weren't they wondering if the masters of, they were wondering if they were sent by,
The ministry.
yeah, thank you,
Yeah.
yeah. So that was interesting, I thought, why were they there? How did they end up there?
Right.
I think that's exactly what Dumbledore was saying, but
Right.
failed.
Right, not so much pointing fingers.
But they're under your instructions, so
Right.
how come they were there?
Right, it's kind of ironic that they were there.
Right. And they're what Harry fears the most.
Right.
And so if Voldemort can read Harry's thoughts, was that something Harry would assume? Like, did Voldemort send these on to me because he knows they're what I'm the most afraid of? And yet at the same time, now Dumbledore behind the scenes knows more than Harry politically, and he's putting in that sense of doubt. I'm not really sure that this is Voldemort's doing.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if it's one of you people up there in the stands.
Right.
And in the end, we do find out. It was Umbridge.
Every time I watch the film, my first reaction is, I'm going to take that girl. The Bronx got settled in the girls.
What happens to Umbridge at the end really is just so fitting. Her demise with the centaurs, Hermione
Getting dragged off, yeah.
Like how much she's just known for discriminating against like creatures and people, or just like beings that she sees as lesser than, and then she ends up getting like killed by them. So it's
Yeah.
very fitting.
And the power that she's wanting with each of those treatises that gets posted up on the wall of
It
the
was great
school.
to see them fall, wasn't it? That was a great scene.
Yeah. So back to Umbridge with her classism, right? She's prejudiced against the centaurs, and we see that as the next one unfolds, and then 7, we see that she again also is very much against anyone who's not of pure wizard blood.
Well, it's not just Umbridge in this either.
Right.
Like there's this weave all the way through this whole movie. Like a creature being nasty right there at the beginning. I mean, creature's being a creature, but he's just like, I think he's like friend of mudbloods or something like that.
Blood traitors.
Yeah. Like there's over that. I mean, you see, like I can't stop that. The ministry really just dives headlong into fascism with the Ministry of Magic. I mean, you get the big flags and the big pictures to him, and Umbridge even has the picture of him on her desk, and it's like, I don't know, it's not just Umbridge in this. There's this weave all the way through where they're dealing with it with all these different characters.
But there's the undercurrent throughout the whole thing of this discrimination.
Yeah.
That this discrimination and the negative side of the ministry.
Mhm.
That even though right now times are good because Voldemort's gone, there's still that undercurrent that's just waiting to come through.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's just bubbling right under the surface. Yeah. And so keep that point in mind when we talk about Dumbledore's army in a little while. But with this classism, I mentioned it when we were reading book 2 and talking about movie 2, because it was, I felt like when we talked about the Malfoys in depth, I needed to go ahead and address something that's in the 5th one. And when you're watching the 5th one and you see Harry and Mr. Weasley walking into the Ministry, and then again at the very last scene, they're in that same spot of like the entryway to the Ministry of Magic where Dumbledore and Voldemort are fighting. Well, that's where that fountain is that I brought up when we were talking about movie 2, when we were talking about the Malfoys and how racist they were towards just other people that were in the wizarding world that weren't purebloods, but also how they were discriminatory towards their house elf and beating Dobby and that kind of thing. I brought it up then that it's so, up until now, it's been a lot more subtle with, oh, we are wizards, we're the best, but at what cost to these other magical creatures? And then we see, I mean, they break one of them when Miss Umbridge goes out into the forest to have a talking to with those centaurs, and they carry her off. But in that fountain scene, there is like the house elves and the goblins and the centaurs, and they're all at the base, and then the wizards are up above them. And it's a little less, obvious when you're watching a movie because they aren't like zooming in on all of those pieces. But just to bring back the element that I did mention in movie 2, the fountain has like a wishing well component. And as Harry's walking past it, he notices a plaque, and he's about to go in for his hearing, and he's really worried because Hogwarts is his home, right? He can't imagine life without Hogwarts. He's like, well, maybe I can go to Sirius's house. Maybe I can be on the run. Maybe they'll let me be Hagrid's assistant. I mean, he's naming all these ways that maybe I can still be part of this wizarding world, because I am not staying with the Dursleys my whole life. No way. Now that I know this other option. But anyway, he gets there to the fountain. He sees that it says, donations acquired in this fountain will go to St. Mungo's Hospital for Magical Maladies and Injuries. And so the money that's donated in this fountain is going to a good cause, yet the meaning behind the fountain of saying, okay, wizards above all else, or all other creatures, that's just sending a message that I feel like is woven into this one that becomes more and more obvious as the book and movie goes on, because the Harry is first to say that, but then others follow and start to come into Dumbledore's army, right? And so we'll get into that one a little bit more later. Harry gets introduced to a new lovely character this movie. She can see the Thestrals just like him. What are your thoughts on Luna? And as we talk about Luna, let's contrast her with Hermione.
They all think she's crazy,
Mm-hmm.
but at times, boy, she hits the nail on the head.
Yeah.
She just, and she's quite content with who she is.
Mm-hmm.
She
No apologies,
Yeah,
right?
nobody gets surprises.
Yeah,
Right.
kind of great.
Yeah.
Travel along, come move away.
I see her as a flower child.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's
She's
a
also-
good
She
way.
seems very forgiving of all the things the other girls do to her. in
Yeah,
her house.
yeah. Yeah, like her shoes.
I noticed her barefoot. I asked Caitlin, to wear her shoes. She said she's bullied terribly by the other housemates.
Even though Ravenclaw is supposed to be the house of like creativity, they're not very accepting when people go outside of their like normal. And I feel like Hermione's also like that. Hermione is very book smart and very, this is the right way to do things and this is the wrong way. And if you're not on this right way, you're just like crazy. So Luna, saying all the weird things that she says, and it's so just seeming like out of her mind. Hermione's just assumes she's insane.
Well, and even Hermione, I mean, the way that she addresses the Thestrals, they're pulling themselves like always, Harry. Just how matter of fact her vocabulary is about it, or there's no voices, Harry. She's never open to the fact that it might not be something she can wrap her head around.
There might be something there that she doesn't see, but she can't even fathom that thought.
I think that might also tie into her being a Muggle-born, because she's not used to magic, and magic is like almost unexplainable in ways. Like maybe some of the kids that like were raised around magic, they don't see it as like a crazy thing. Like Thestrals being there to pull the carriages is like just something like, oh, okay. Like I guess there is a creature there. But Hermione, like once something is explained to her, she's very set in her ways. Like this is correct.
If she's magic is a learned skill to her, where Harry, every time they show you, he's awed by it. Like when they go into the tent.
Oh, right.
You know, he walks in and goes, I love that.
Yeah. He still has the wonder.
Yeah.
Even when the building came,
Yeah.
he stood there like this, just like it would have been like the first movie, you know, like he's in awe still of that.
When it's in Ron's house.
Yeah.
You know, the clock and
Yeah,
then
yeah.
you see he's not only awed by it, he eats it up. He eats it up. But she is learning this.
Right. She wants to acquire the knowledge, yeah. Not necessarily the experiences as much, yeah. So do we have any other details from those of you who've read the books that you feel would be important for us to love Luna even more? You're welcome to share some.
I don't know from the books, but like the movies, or the stories just keep going into like the Weasleys, just these non-prestigious characters. You know, like this one's like Neville and all these things. And Luna's like, she's such a, like, I really watched it on Friday night again. And I was like, Luna's such a lovable character. Like, she's just a good character in the movies. But there's no reason to really believe in her. You know, like there's no like actual reason. Besides, she knows what she's talking about with all the weird stuff going around. I don't know the names for the stuff.
Quibbler,
Yeah, the Quibbler, but that's not in this one, is it?
her father's magazine.
It's not in this
Yeah,
one.
she mentions it.
Oh.
She mentions it on, that's why I was giving Caitlin or Evelyn a chance to bring out any details if they want to. But they did. She's holding the Quibbler, and then she's got, if you don't notice it, but she's on the carriage, it's upside down.
I saw that and I'm thinking, but I thought that was part of her crazy, like the backstory of her crazy.
Yeah, so
I think it's interesting how, you know, like Luna comes in as a new character, you know, if you're watching the movies, I don't know about the books, but.
yeah, she's new in the books too.
Okay, so, but anyway, I mean, as a parallel, God gives each of us things to do. I mean, what he calls me to do is not what he calls you to do. And all of these characters all contribute to the whole. You know, they're not all alike. They're so, and her character is so refreshingly different. You know, but she brings to the table, you know, an important perspective, you know, like God using us for different things.
Well, I like her connection with Harry and the death. And that's why
Oh,
they can
yeah.
see the horse thing.
Yeah, Thestrals.
Thestral.
With a TH, Thestrals.
Cool. I'll
I think
remember
it's
that.
TH.
Yeah. Also, Luna and what she does, like with the Quibbler and her father, like getting those articles published, because like the ministry was running their smear campaign against Harry, but Luna had the Quibbler publish articles from Harry, like interviews,
Like positive light articles.
like just like the truth, like according to Harry.
Yeah.
Well, because the Quibbler is not producing anything with me.
It's, the Quibbler is seen as kind of like a joke in
Yeah.
publishing, but because the Prophet is so like ministry handled, the Quibbler is seen as like an outside force.
Yeah, another thing that Luna brings to the table is real empathy for where Harry has come from.
It gives him a buddy.
I felt like she was
Like
such a
it
good
gives
friend.
him someone who can really understand, because Hermione has said to Harry in the movie, in this one, he'll say, "You don't understand. Well, help us to." He's not in a position yet, because of the grief he's gone through and the fears that he has. I don't think he's ready to do that much work to help someone understand. Like, it's not time for him to heal in that way yet. He needs someone like Luna who already can recognize the pain and just empathize.
Because he's having enough trouble dealing with it himself.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, not to mention woven throughout this one, and now it doesn't really explain this very well, but Luna's the same grade as Ginny, so she's a year younger than them, but it doesn't really matter. But you know, these kids are sitting here getting ready for these exams, and they don't go into it that much in the movies, but these exams are really going to determine what they're even allowed to take the next year for classes, and if they can't take enough classes, they aren't going to be able to really graduate correctly and get a real job that is, you know, productive. And so there is a lot of pressure at this 14-year-old age for them to perform at a very high level. And so I've mentioned it before, but it is interesting to me how much of the book is them doing school. And it's a lot.
And then I don't want to jump ahead, but then you've got Fred and George at the end who said, we really weren't cut out for academics.
Right, yeah. You're not jumping ahead. We are not staying chronological anymore. It's so much easier to just popcorn around, I think, and then just hit the very end at the end. But yeah, talk about anything. But I feel like them having that anxiety of what normal kids would have to have, that part of it would already be enough to make them stress out. Because there's kids that you hear about in the books that are like trying to take these like anti-anxiety potions and stuff to like just cope and like, okay, well, maybe I won't have to sleep tonight. How many hours of studying are you getting in a night? And they're all just like freaking out about it. And yet at the same time, we've got this drama bubbling up in the ministry and this potential death threat on Harry just looming out there. And then that brings me to the line, and we talked some, you know, with Luna and Hermione. So I want us to transition to the Dumbledore's army discussion. And with the reason I had that transition was because when in the movie, the rain is falling and it's dark and Hermione and Ron and Harry are standing there and they've just talked to Sirius in the fire. And Hermione goes, he really is out there, isn't he? And if Umbridge isn't going to teach us, we need a proper teacher. We need to take this into our own hands, right? So and that, I think I'm mixing two scenes, but Hermione has that moment of transition where even if she's not as open to craziness as Luna, and she hasn't experienced it like Harry, she has now gotten enough evidence that she's ready to be on board with it, right? And so she doesn't know as much as Harry, but she's ready to act, right? So what happens with this ministry? I'm sorry, not ministry. What happens with this Dumbledore's army? And then also in contrast with that, let's talk about Umbridge's Defense Against the Dark Arts class.
Well, at that point, she kind of says to Harry, we gotta do something.
Right.
And that's when Neville finds the meeting room.
Room of requirement.
And Harry basically explains to the group that meets with the anticipation of joining Dumbledore's army, that this is not fun and games.
Right.
You know, he's back. Okay. Cedric was killed. There's no, I mean, this was not a boo-boo, this was not a mistake. We're dealing with life and death. And my opinion was he basically said to them, if you're gonna do this, understand it is a life and death situation. This is no more fun in school. This is not getting good grades. We're actually dealing with our lives here.
Right. And what do you think would be the motive for these kids showing up? Like, what do we know about some of them and their backstories? Or we had quite the selection of kids that showed up there that day. But Seamus wasn't there yet. Seamus has been Harry's roommate now for 4 years, and this is the 5th year. And we heard at the beginning, Seamus's mother thinks Harry's crazy, so therefore Seamus is like, I'm not for you, Potter. And so Seamus isn't one that, you know, joins the army right away.
Neville does. His
Neville's
parents-
there.
Yeah, his parents were killed.
Were victims.
Yeah, I mean, it's real for him. He understands. He was raised by his grandmother because his parents stood for good instead of evil.
Right. And so I'll clarify that just a little bit because they don't make it as obvious in the book, but Neville's parents are not actually dead. Neville's parents are just crazy because they've been, the Cruciatus curse just drove them into madness, and they're actually at the St. Mungo's hospital and they don't remember Neville. So
They really brought the storyline of Neville and the relationship, the comparison, the parallels to Harry together in this, I thought.
yes. Yes, and some of that's more obvious with the books as well. But some of the details we find out in this one are that Harry and Neville were born the same month of the same year, and they were both of wizarding families that were in the Order of the Phoenix. And so at the end, when Dumbledore is talking with Harry about a little bit more of the details, that conversation is much longer and much more dramatic in the books. It's about a minute of screen time. But one of the pieces that does get left out is talking about how much of the story could have been different had Voldemort chosen Neville. Because the prophecy didn't say Harry Potter. It said a boy born at the end of July. Well, they were both born at the end of July. And so it could have gone the other way. And I know Brad brought it up the first week and saying, like, what would have happened if Harry had just been a little bit more friendly to Draco, right? And the same could be true here. Like, what could have happened if it was Neville instead of Harry? I mean, would Neville's mother have sacrificed herself for her son, and would he have then had that blood protection? You know, there's all kinds of things to think about. But as we watch Neville's story develop over the next 3 movies, be thinking about that there are a lot of parallels between Harry's life and Neville's. And they're both basically orphans because, I mean, Neville's parents can't care for him.
In this, I felt that they brought out more that evil is really out there and exists.
Yeah,
Because prior to that, it was the bad guy, Voldemort.
right.
You know, he was the bad guy. Everything was
Yeah.
focused on him.
Right.
There was never, it's here, it's right in here. You just need the right person to bring it out. And I think this is what the children started to realize.
The kids are realizing it, but what's Umbridge presenting in class?
Yeah, well, she's presented to the opposite.
She said, how does she describe her classroom?
And no more spells, right?
No more spells.
She wants everything just by the book, whatever the ministry says.
It's a children's book too.
Yeah, it looks very 1950s style, yeah.
Well, and she doesn't want, she's making a concerted effort for them to be ill prepared.
Right.
Yeah, only theory, no practice, yeah. Yeah.
So
And
is
even-
that
and they- Go ahead.
because she is a part of the dark side here? Or is that because she just doesn't want to face the reality?
I think the latter.
Right, I think she's just following
Umbridge and the rest of
Yeah,
them.
Doesn't want to believe that it really is the evil out there.
I don't know. What do you think?
I think she's part of it. She enjoyed too much Harry writing, I will not tell why. And when they're all taking the exam, if you're looking, their hands, and she's sitting there with that smug look on her face. You know, she enjoyed it.
I don't think she was ever a marked Death Eater, especially for her position in the ministry. I don't think there's any way for her to actually be marked. I think she was definitely a sympathizer though with their cause because she was so prejudiced against everyone. She just, like you said, she just enjoys torture too much, especially against innocent children. Her little inquisitorial squad that she had, like she just had her little group of
Like
followers.
spies, like
Her
spies,
inquisitorial squad, pretty much, she gave them the same power as prefects, but it was like Draco and Pansy Parkinson and all those
Bunch of
Slytherins.
Slytherins, yeah.
Is that unlike the prefects, they only had Umbridge to answer to, so they would take off points for literally anything.
Right.
Yeah, she gave them the power to take points away from other people. So Draco is just taking points from Harry just out of spite. And basically Gryffindor ends up in negative points.
Draco is still definitely a child in this movie.
Showing
He's
his
very
childish ways.
immature. He still has that schoolboy rivalry with Harry. It's not like a battlefield rivalry like Harry has with Dumbledore. It's not like life or death. Draco and Harry are still just being very petty. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like this book is really fun just for how much of like the school aspect you get of it, because in the movies it feels so much like war and like stuff going on, like dark wizard battles, but in the book they're having like meetings with their heads of houses to decide their like career paths and stuff. Like there's also just so many moments where it makes it more real, like Harry's deciding what career he wants to be when he grows up. It's interesting.
Yeah. So I'm just gonna read some little bits from this book about this Defense Against the Dark Arts Club that they're working on creating, and then coming up with the name Dumbledore's Army. Like that wasn't the intent at the beginning. I got Christy made the shirt for me. But it wasn't their intent to call it Dumbledore's Army, but they knew they needed a teacher. They knew they needed to practice these skills in a way that was productive. They wanted to be prepared. But they weren't all on the same place. They weren't all in the same place of knowing why they needed to join. And I think of that like us in a ministry or us in a church group, because we're not all coming at it from the exact same part of our journey. We're all different in our ages or our class or our personalities and our gifts and our interests. But like, at the end of the day, we can still move forward together. We don't have to wait till we're 100% in alignment with our ideology to say, let's move together, right? And so that's kind of what happens with these people. And I feel like it's attributed to Hermione, even though we were kind of bashing on her a little bit ago in comparison to Luna's open-mindedness. Hermione is the one that's acting here. And the last one I told you that she created that Society for the Prevention of Elfish Welfare. She's a doer. In spite of her other flaws, she wants to get things done. And so it says here, in the end, what the reader learns from Hermione is that you don't have to get a group to agree on fundamental questions in order to marshal them into collective action. You need to leave a space for curiosity and not try to force consensus before building community or sharing in a moral or spiritual practice. The brilliant idea in this scene is that if enough people are curious about what might be true or possible, they will take the next step to sign their name into the group, a symbolic but no less real step towards collective action. Hermione knows that she doesn't have to get folks to agree on all the reasons for learning defensive spells, But here, Harry wants shared convictions because to him it's so personal, right? He wants everyone to agree with him 100%. But Hermione wants shared curiosity. So although we've seen her be more definitive, black and white on most things, all of a sudden she has that epiphany at the window and she's ready to collectively act with her peers, even though they're not all on exactly the same page. She's okay with that. She's okay with lunacy. Like, it's okay. She's willing, because once her heart gets transformed in that way, she's ready to act. And I thought that was interesting.
I feel like Hermione had a lot of character development in this book specifically, and I think it's a lot to do with Umbridge, because Hermione is very like, she sees authority figures as like the highest power out there. Like teachers and government officials are like just the best people. But then she has to deal with Umbridge, and she sees Umbridge as an incompetent fool who's entirely destructive to everyone.
Yeah.
So her breaking the rules and like going around Umbridge and stuff, it shows how she's moving on from being that black and white character and is more willing to try new things out.
Yeah. And just like one of the parables that I'll read here in a second, with Umbridge, there's nothing in that textbook that's inherently wrong. She's just trying to take it back to such a basic theory and no practical elements that it's kind of taking away the heart of the matter, and it's taking away all motivation for the kids. But not only that, it's not the full picture of what Defense Against the Dark Arts is. Like if they were in their history of magic class or their astronomy class, sure, they can do those from a book, but this in potions, you really need to practice.
Yeah, like part of their OWLs is a practical exam. Like they're not able to just get away with doing theory.
Yeah. And so it says, according to Jesus, right teaching without right practice brings destruction. So I think of like the Pharisees, right? He told a story comparing a person who built his house on solid rock to one who built it on sand, and here's what it symbolized. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against the house, yet it did not fall because it had its foundation on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against the house, and it fell with a great crash. So I think about how like Harry's so compelled, the whole Dumbledore's army, they've been compelled by this idea of like, no, we need a solid foundation here. We need to practice this. It's not just about learning something, it's about applying it. And I think that's brave of them to do that, because I mean, they are doing it at great personal risk, because they're sneaking out in the nighttime when they're not supposed to, and they're like finding this like secret room. So let's talk about the room of requirement a little bit. I don't think we need to symbolize it with prayer, and the reason why is because of what happens in the next one. Because the room of requirement can be used for good and bad. So if we were to pray, I mean, the way that our prayers are heard and God responds to that is not going to take us down an evil path, right? So I don't necessarily think that that would be the direction we need to take this, because we do see in the next one that someone uses the room of requirement for evil. And sneaking. You don't know this, but Professor Trelawney uses the room of requirement to hide her sherry bottles. Yeah. But that's not what I'm saying, it's evil, but but what do you guys think of this room?
Don't the house elves know of it too? Like they have their own name for it.
Yeah.
The room of requirement, and also Dumbledore mentions it at some point. Finding a room of
The
chamber.
one right before, yeah.
It's very useful for Harry and like the whole group, because it can give them anything they need to practice with, and it creates like, it knows exactly what you want, and also it protects them from the Inquisitorial Squad at some point, because they see Dumbledore's army go into the room, and then when they open the door for it, it's a broom closet, so they just get really confused.
in the book, they do it a little bit differently with, I mean, there's no reason for all the details to be in the book or in the movie related to this room. But it's not something that the other group can just like blast into like Umbridge did. But it's because someone who had previously wanted to go in there took them to the room. And the same was true when Harry shows up with Mad Eye Moody and those other guys on the brooms, and they show up in front of the Grimmauld place at the very beginning, back when Harry was going to see the his godfather's house, the Grimmauld place, the Order of the Phoenix headquarters. It's the same kind of magic in the sense that only the person who has the secret can share the secret with someone else. And that's the same type of magic that we also saw when Peter Pettigrew betrayed Lily and James when Harry's parents died. So it's like called secret keeping or whatever. So it's kind of similar magic woven into those different little elements. But I kind of feel like this little Dumbledore's army group, it's like they're having their little confirmation, right? I mean, spiritually, like if we think of that, they're making their faith their own when they go off. No one's telling them, here are your standards to learn in fifth year, or by the time you leave Hogwarts, here's what you have to know. They're like digging into it for themselves, applying the learning, trying to find out new things. And I just think it's beautiful that they did that.
They could have gone the other way.
Yeah.
They could have very easily said, no, I'm gonna not stick my neck out, I'll just go with the flow,
Right.
stay in the background.
Yeah.
The room of requirement, our sermon today was on the church in Philadelphia and how God opens doors that no one can shut. And, you know, are we willing to walk through those doors that he opens? And in the movie, they were willing to walk through that door that he opened, well, that was opened.
Yeah. And I mean, that's part of Harry's battle cry to these people as he's training them, so to speak. He says, every great wizard in history has started out as nothing more than what we are now, students, right? If they can do it, why not us? And that's just the whole thing. It's like, well, yeah, that's how a movement is born, is people inspire other people. We've talked over the last few weeks of the balance of good and evil and Harry's draw towards destroying evil or fleeing from evil. And a lot of our reasoning with that was just because of the trauma of his past and what happened with his family. And sometimes he does that to the extent that it's reckless in some cases. So we see that again here, and woven throughout that, I feel like, is his love for his godfather and his relationship with his godfather, right? So let's transition and let's talk about Harry's fight for good and talk a little bit about his love for his godfather.
Isn't this the one where he finds that he has the power of love?
Yeah,
This is one, okay.
yeah. I know, they all just kind of blend. Yeah, yeah. And I think he's recognized that before in snippets, just because when he did finally conjure that Patronus, I think he realized there that he had some of that power. Then the last one, he got a little bit more aware of it because of the blood that Voldemort took from him and then talking with Dumbledore afterwards. So he's realizing how important his love power can be. Yeah, but this time he literally fought Voldemort in his brain with love there at the end.
Yeah. He was recalling all the moments when he experienced the love.
Right.
And it appeared as though each time he did, it grew stronger. He was stronger.
I feel sorry for you that he interjected. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's the worst thing you could have said to Voldemort. That, you know, I don't see you as a powerful I feel so sorry. I mean, that must have been infuriating.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that's one thing that the fourth movie does well, is show Voldemort interacting with like Peter Pettigrew and all of those whole people, the Death Eaters and all of that, how it's just contempt for them all.
Yeah.
That he blames them, like, you're scared, you're not loyal.
There is no friendship
Yeah.
with any of them.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. Sirius, when talking with Harry, and Harry, you know, he's had Luna to kind of empathize with, but now he has this other fatherly figure. He's realizing, oh, I can write to him. Like in the last one, he's like, oh, I had my scar hurt from that vision of the snake killing that man. I can write to my godfather. I've not had a parent figure before. And he, you know, he gets a little excited. And then this time he's actually getting some relationship time with Sirius because he's in his home in the summer and
You
then
felt
over
like
Christmas.
family in this movie.
Yeah.
More, right?
Yeah.
You
Just
felt that
to rip it
connection.
away.
I know. I know. But you did feel like when he saw him at the Weasleys, it was like dad, you know, it was like a real father figure for him. You could feel that.
Yeah. And I think we talked about this one in the third one with Lupin, and we talked about how it was like, oh, Lupin, did he really care about Harry that much, or was it just his affection and memory for James? Or was it truly him caring for Harry during that one? And I think the same question comes up for Sirius's relationship with Harry too. What do you guys think of that?
I think they both, it's a mixture of the two. I think they both cared for Harry because they definitely cared for him as a baby. But also as he gets older, he looks more and more like James every day. And I think that definitely influences their views of him. They see him more as a friend than as like a child to protect. I mean, Sirius more than Lupin there. Lupin had that professor element, and I think that helps him view Harry more as Harry. But Sirius definitely Sirius misses his friends so much because I feel like that's what kept him staying through Azkaban.
Yeah. Well, and it's also hard too with Harry's relationship with Sirius, because like you just said with Lupin, he had a structural headship over Harry as a professor. But with Sirius, Harry saved him. So that's already putting a power shift a little bit in the relationship. So yeah, I can see where it never would have felt like a true parent-child relationship just because of the nature of how they met.
Also, I feel at this point, Harry doesn't really need a father figure. Like Sirius is like his fun uncle, but Harry has done so much growing up in his entire life, like with the Dursleys. He never had a parental figure as a child, so he's almost past that. Like he's old.
So what, I know this is random and I'm jumping around, but what was this portal that Sirius fell through or fell up through or whatever? What at the end, after the.
It's a veil.
That's just all it's called though.
Yeah, they don't really describe it in the book very much.
It's in the Department of Mysteries because it is a mystery. Like they just don't know what it is.
But
It's
he's
just a
going
veil
to the afterlife,
I
right?
mean, as far as we know though, like
It's representative of a portal into the
What's
afterlife.
yeah,
beyond,
like
right?
because Bellatrix knocks him in there, and then that's what happens. Like,
Yeah.
So
just
is
goes-
he gone then?
Yeah.
Yes.
Here?
Yes.
I always understood that that was an execution style chamber.
Mm,
That's how I always understood / read it.
okay. That's interesting. Yeah, I hadn't thought of it much.
Well, the way they have it laid out, there's all these seats all around it.
That's true. Yeah, that does make sense. It's horrific, but yeah, the people Luna and Harry are the only ones that can hear through there to the voices calling out. Oh, look at that adorableness. But I think that with Harry and Sirius's relationship, one thing, you know, I mean, Harry's still using him as a mentor figure. I mean, he's still asking him for advice. He comes to him in the fire, and then in the book, and other element that there's another element that isn't in the movie is when Snape has that occlumency with Harry, and we see that Harry has a vision of James bullying Snape. That tore Harry up. They don't really show Harry's inner turmoil in the movie very much, but Harry sees this man that he's idolized since he was old enough to know that his father was dead, right? And then every year he hears, "You're so much like James, you're so much like James." And then he sees this scene, and Harry's not a mean-spirited kid. And it's very obvious in the books that he and Ron, even though they have a few tips or whatever, they are kind people. And so for Harry to think, I'm like my father, and then I would never have done that. It's like a real crisis of faith for Harry. And so Harry sneaks into Umbridge's office and does that fire talking thing with Lupin and Sirius. And they have a conversation with him. And part of that comes to head when Harry's there at Christmas, and Harry and Sirius are talking, and they're standing there looking at the family tree on the wall. And so the same sentiment comes out then when Sirius says, well, we're not all either good people or Death Eaters. We all have a little bit of light and dark in us. And I think that that's something that we talked earlier, Hermione has struggled with black and white with regard to belief and unbelief of the things she can't understand. But Harry has struggled with black and white of good versus evil and thinking it's either all bad or it's all good. And I think that's a way that Sirius is helping him to grow.
We can talk about Snape.
Go ahead.
Okay, I hate Snape for
Okay.
multiple reasons.
Oh, yeah.
He did not deserve his redemption arc. So everyone sees Snape as this like bullied, traumatized kid. But in the books, there's lines where it mentions that Snape gave it back as good as the Marauders hit him with. He was already a budding Death Eater by this point. He invented a dark curse by the time he was a 6th year. He wasn't just like this innocent victim of the Marauders. He was a dark wizard by that point. He called Lily, this gets revealed in the 6th book, I think.
No, it's in this memory. It's in this memory.
He called Lily a mudblood after being her best friend for years. And was it after like intense humiliation? Yes. But also, like, that had to be in his mind, he had to already be going down that Death Eater path and he even considered calling her like a slur. I don't know. There's just so many things. Also, he bullies children, and like
He has good and evil in him, right? He has to fight it back a little bit.
11-year-olds. He's Neville's greatest fear. Neville's uncle dropped him out of a window and almost drowned him when he was like 8. But yet Snape is still his greatest fear at the age of 13. There's a lot of things that he does that just makes him like dislike Snape so much.
Pedagogy.
Yep. Well, and also, I mean, Cameron's point, that is what the room of requirement counteracted. I mean, because these kids couldn't, she just keeps waving, she's just so cute. But the room of requirement was necessary for these kids to really hone in on those skills because the professors were not meeting their needs academically or practically, right? We didn't talk about Hagrid yet.
Hagrid and his trip to the Giants.
Yeah.
So he shows up with his half brother.
Yes,
Right.
and a lot of wounds
Yeah.
So what's the back
and no
story?
good alibi.
Right.
Because Umbridge is like, you're a gamekeeper, why do you need fresh air?
Yeah, basically what happens is he goes to visit the giant, to visit like the giants, because he's half giant.
Right.
So he goes and visits the giants, assumingly on like Dumbledore's orders, to like make friends with them. Like, because Lupin goes and visits the werewolves, Harry goes and visits the giants, because they're all preparing for war. This entire book is
Trying to
preparation
rally
for
more
war.
troops.
Okay, the Giants would be a good troop to rally.
Yes.
Well, because otherwise,
Big troop rally.
it's either they go to Dumbledore's side or they go to Voldemort's side.
Gotcha.
And the thing with Voldemort is he's on the dark side, which means that there's a high possibility that dark creatures will go for him.
Right.
Like werewolves.
So they're trying to
So
get
they're
them first.
trying to like present reasons why they would be better. And Hagrid goes to visit the giants and bring them over to Dumbledore's side. Doesn't work very well. As shown by his.
And so out of fear for his little brother,
Right. His little big brother.
he brings him back with him. We've seen Hagrid care for a creature so much before and get himself into trouble. And now he's going down the same path again, right?
But that's his nature.
Yeah. But he couldn't stand to see his brother ostracized even from that group. Because apparently his brother was little for a giant. And so he was being bullied among the giants. And his little tender heart, Hagrid just had to bring him back with him.
And I like what, I mean, he's tied around the waist to a tree. What? I mean, obviously that didn't work out in the long term.
No, especially when we see the chain with nothing on it there at the end when Hermione's walking through the woods. So that's an interesting thing to try to connect the ending. Hermione is just thinking on the fly, and I don't know if that comes across in the movie as well, but she's like, I'm just gonna lead her through the woods and make as much noise as I can, and hopefully the centaurs come. And like, she acts up, like she's got all these hopes and dreams built into this panicked way of maybe getting away from Umbridge. Meanwhile, Harry is thinking, we're wasting time. Sirius might already be dead. And then Hermione, even though she wants to support Harry, in her mind, she's thinking, Harry, you weren't very good at occlumency because you and Snape didn't get along. Are you really sure that you saw what you think you saw? But yet she's still willing to go with him. And what dedication of a friend, right? I mean, to the point of recklessness. These kids show a lot of reckless behavior all throughout. It's the Gryffindors and yep. And then we take one lone Ravenclaw with us. Yeah.
Hermione, I feel like Hermione seems so much more, she doesn't seem like this in the movies as much, but in the books, she's definitely very vicious in this movie. Marietta Edgecombe. Like one thing that she does, I don't know if it shows in the movie, but in the books, all the DA members have to write their name on a piece of paper. And what happens is this girl, Marietta Edgecombe, ends up ratting out the DA to Umbridge. And and because she does that, it writes on her forehead like snitch or something, like boils, and
That was Hermione.
that was
Yeah.
Hermione.
She cursed the paper in such a way, or jinxed the paper, so that if anyone broke the contract, Snape would be
Wouldn't be able to hide it.
Also, doesn't she do is it in this movie where they enchant like the coins to like heat up or something?
Yeah.
Hermione does some really cool spell work, and like she really does like come into her own in this movie specifically. Like
She's
Hermione's a
ready
very
to
impressive
act.
character.
Showing off those skills.
Yeah.
So she creates these special coins that would get warm in your pocket to let you know that they had set a new time and place, or a time and day for meeting in the room of requirement. So when you pull the coin out, it would subtly say the date, but if you just looked at it any other time that it wasn't warm, it would just look like a regular galleon. So,
And then also Luna at the end was a very good character. She's the one who suggested the transport method to the ministry. She got them to ride the Thestrals over, and her and Ginny are a lot more important, I feel like, in the books and movies, especially Ginny. Ginny's very much Harry's like romantic interest and not her own character.
did she even end up going with them in the movie?
Yeah,
Is she
she's
there?
there.
She's there? Okay.
Because she knocks everything out.
That's right, that's right.
Yeah.
That's when Luna says, "We'll fly."
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Can you imagine though, all those poor kids who had never seen death riding that imaginary creature up in the air over
Okay, so Harry, when he is experiencing these things, is that Voldemort playing with him, or was Sirius really in trouble?
So what happens is throughout most of the year, Voldemort is unaware until the end. At the end, Voldemort is sending Harry that vision of, because Sirius wasn't there. Sirius was, I think he was still at Grimmauld Place, but he was definitely not in the Department of Mysteries. Voldemort used that vision to lure Harry there, and that's the reason why they showed up in the first place. Like Voldemort was ready for Harry to be there as a trap to get the prophecy.
So at Christmas, when they were all hanging out at Grimmauld Place, because Mr. Weasley had been attacked and was hurt, the kids are hanging out there, Sirius is there, Creature, the house elf, is there, and Creature is loyal to the house because of the secrecy thing I talked about, that spell that they have on the house. So remember how Dobby would like bang his head because he couldn't tell the secrets of the Malfoy house, but he could give Harry subtle hints? The same thing was happening to Creature with his magic. We just don't see it in the movie, but Sirius gets angry at Creature at Christmas and says, "Get out of here." So Creature takes it literally and actually goes to the Malfoy's house. And he can't tell all the secrets. He can't tell where Grimmauld Place is, and he can't tell who's there. But what he can tell enough subtleties that Voldemort realizes that the person that means the most to Harry is Sirius. And so he can gain that much information, and that's what Voldemort can use to manipulate Harry. And that's why Lucius said in the Ministry, well, the Dark Lord had you see what he wanted you to see. And so that was supposed to be referencing some of that other stuff. But that's how that happened, is through Creature. Creature betrayed in that way. Not only that, but when Harry puts his knees down, Umbridge doesn't come right away and bust him. He actually gets into the fire and talks to Creature and says, "Where's Sirius?" And Creature says, "Master is not here." So he lies to Harry because he doesn't have any ownership to Harry, or like loyalty to Harry. So Creature actually tells Harry that Sirius isn't there. And so that's what makes Sirius insistent that, okay, or that's why Harry says Sirius must be in danger if Creature says Sirius isn't here. So those are just...
Okay, backing up. So we've established that Voldemort was messing with Harry about Sirius in the mystery area of the Ministry. But what happened to Mr. Weasley was true. Harry did see that.
Correct. And that's when Voldemort started to realize that he could get into Harry's head. Because Voldemort was possessing the snake and telling the snake what to do. And therefore, it was just all kind of some things that'll come to light in the last movie. We'll figure all that out as to why. But for right now, we realize that there's a connection between Voldemort and Harry, Voldemort and the snake, and therefore Harry and the snake. And it freaks Harry out, but he was trying to use it to his advantage by feeling like, well, maybe if I can read Voldemort's mind, I can figure out what's going on with Sirius. And then that's when Sirius tricked him, or that's when Voldemort tricked him. But another component to that that's a little bit harder to understand from the movie point of view is the reason why Voldemort wanted Harry to go to the Department of Mysteries at all. Voldemort didn't want to just walk into the Department of Mysteries himself and get caught. He liked that the Ministry of Magic was in turmoil, not knowing that he was really back, but thinking he might be. And he liked that power that he had over them of the speculation. So he didn't want to come out in the open just yet. However, that orb, the glass ball that Harry picked up, we could hear the words because Harry could hear the words. Luna couldn't hear them. Ron didn't hear them. It was just Harry hearing those words because the prophecy was about Harry and Voldemort. So either Voldemort was going to have to get the prophecy or Harry, but no one else. And therefore, that's why Voldemort led Harry there and thought, well, if Harry picks it up, then Lucius can steal it from him, bring it to me, and then I can hear what the prophecy says. Because Voldemort knew that there was a prophecy about him and Harry, or could have been Neville, but he chose Harry as his equal. It said that the Dark Lord will mark him as his equal, so he picked Harry. And so he only knew part of the prophecy. He wanted to hear the whole thing. And then the part he didn't know was neither can live while the other survives. And so that's the part that Dumbledore helped Harry kind of understand there at the end.
You know, I feel like Sirius's death was made especially tragic considering Bellatrix was his cousin. Like, they've had to have like grown up together,
Right.
and then to like be killed by her. It's just like,
And she was so excited about
Yeah,
it, right?
Bellatrix
Like
is-
proud of herself.
Bellatrix is very affected by the Black Madness. That's like a big thing with it, because Sirius's family is known for their inbreeding. Their house, his house's motto is "Toward is pure," which is like always pure. So they took that to mean like their blood is always pure. So there's a lot of inbreeding. Like Sirius's parents are cousins, and then there's like I have the family tree like, so it's Sirius's brother and their cousins are Bellatrix, Draco's mother, and another cousin who got disowned for marrying a Muggleborn. So that whole generation of Blacks was very like, there was two members who got disowned for going to the light side, and then the rest of them are kind of crazy. Like, especially Bellatrix. Bellatrix was like insane, especially with Azkaban.
Including that young lady who helped Harry get from his house to Grimmauld Place, Tonks, the one who had the purple hair.
That's
She's in the family.
Yeah, that's
The one that got disowned for marrying a Muggle.
And then it's funny because her metamorphagus traits came out, but they hadn't seen the metamorphagus in a while. It's like a black blood trait. And then of course only the one who is a half blood got the special power. Also, I feel like Harry has a lot of unaddressed trauma from the last book that no one really seems to help him with. That boy needs a therapist or something. He just saw his friend die.
Right.
And then everyone calls him a liar, and then they all call him a liar.
They shun him and abuse him, and it all doesn't really come to a head until the end where Harry's destroying Dumbledore's office.
Yeah.
And he has so much angst.
Yeah, so I'll end on that point and then just leading us into a little bit for next week. The scene is only 45 seconds where Harry and Dumbledore are talking, but in the book, Harry is destroying everything in his office. I mean, he is just bashing glass, and it is a mess because he's had this trauma from Cedric, and then now he's just lost the only family he has, and he is in pain. But yet, in spite of all of that, he still has that strong inclination to love, and that's just so powerful. And so the funniest part to me, and I like to say this line sometimes, so at the end of the fourth one, Harry goes, he's back, Voldemort's back. And Fudge, the minister, is right there. goes through a whole year of trying to have a smear campaign on this poor child. Then they get to the end, Voldemort's there, disappears in the Ministry, and then what does he do? Fudge goes,
Now you want to say it.
so the transition now, as books 5 and 6 bridge to each other, and as you rewatch or watch for the first time this week, number 6, be thinking about now the Ministry is on Harry's side, and what does that mean for Harry? I will be bringing up some of those points next week that don't get mentioned in the movie, to just build that backstory a little bit more. But the very first scene of that book is hilarious because it's actually the Minister of Magic talking to the Prime Minister of England.
I love that scene.
I love that scene because it's the bridging of the two worlds in a fun way. And so what that scene is depicted in the movie is the Death Eaters destroying that bridge and that kind of thing. So that's really the only thing they do in the movie, but I love that scene. But I hope you guys have a great week. Please take some more snacks, but also keep in mind, some of them are not good, and that's okay.
Heather, I figured it out. It's Lucky Charms marshmallows. That's what I was like. Yeah, Lucky Charms, like that.
Everyone, she gets excited for that last bowl, when it's all the sugary powder marshmallows into the mouth.
Oh, that's Lucky Charms. I thought it was almond extract in there.
So I tried to make, I'll tell the people at home real fast. I tried to make nougat, but I don't think I got it to the hot enough temperature.